welcome back to the Sound Legacy Podcast. It's great to have you here again. I got a guest today for you. He's a new friend. I think it's fair to say we're pals now. I've met him recently through work, and it's a privilege to know this man. He is a writer, an author. He is a psychologist. He is a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, and author of this book, specifically, A Love in Shadow, which he will be signing before you leave. Don't forget. My guest, Dr. John Boettiger. Thank you so much, Dr. John.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah. And I know you don't normally go by doctor, so thank you for letting me.
I don't use it.
I don't blame you. It's okay. I never use it either.
Yeah.
I don't have it, but I also don't use it. There's so many things I want to talk to you about. For one, I finished reading your lovely book, and I was very taken with not just the emotionality of it, but like how well it was written and how perfectly suited you are specifically to write that book. So we'll get into that. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about your life experience as a Roosevelt, as a kid who grew up in the White House. Can't be very many of you who've done that.
Yes.
And before we leave, I want to talk to you about how you feel about now, today, where we are versus the dignity of the office that you have seen in your life and where we may or may not be in that respect today. So
sounds good.
Yeah, we're going to have a good time. We're going to have a good time.
Yes.
Plenty to cover, so I better stop talking and let you. So, yeah, you grew up, born in Seattle, but you made your way to...
Well, let's see the sequence. When we lived in Seattle, when we lived on Mercer Island in Lake Washington, next to Seattle, in those years, there was a pontoon bridge that linked Seattle with Mercer Island. A little shaky. And World War II really brought functionally an end to our time in that island shore house. My grandfather was already president, of course, and when my father went to war in probably 1942, my grandfather called from the White House and to my mother and said, "Sis," that was his name for her, "Sis, you and Johnny are now living alone in this comfortable but maybe too large house for the two of you. Why don't you come east and live with me?" He did say me, not us, but he really meant us, and so we did. We packed up. My mother packed up, took the train east to Washington, and we lived in the White House between 42 and my grandfather's death on April 12, 1945. And it was an astonishing time. I'd say in many ways a gifted time, but I say that more in retrospect than as I experienced it, because it was an uprooting also, and my father was gone. That was an uprooting. But it was in the White House that my mother and I were assigned to, in her case, the Lincoln bedroom, in my case, the Lincoln closet. And fortunately, that Lincoln's closet was as capacious as I could easily accommodate. I can say a lot of things about those years, but being outdoors on the South Lawn, playing with my first dog that my Uncle Elliot brought home from his time in the Army Air Corps, an event which precipitated almost in... he brought back two dogs, both English bull mastiffs that stood this tall, and and the male immediately took a lunge at Fala, my grandfather's pet, and Fala would have been a goner were it not for the fact that a very skillful Secret Service agent picked Fala up and held it this close. Otherwise, it would have been a disaster. So events like that, my mother reading to me, my father's, in those years we called them female letters that he would send to us at home so I could keep in touch with him after a fashion.
But there's so many things in there. I mean, the fact that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was quite busy in 1942. His hands were very full, but he took the time to make sure that your mother, who, as I read, was a very skillful and wise woman who was very keen to help her father. She always wanted that. It was her dream. Was to help him.
That's absolutely right.
And that he gave her that opportunity.
Well, he gave her that opportunity, and it was a joy to share that experience. For me, it was sort of, other events like getting to know Secret Service agents, going sort of playing Cecil B. DeMille and the White House Theater when there was nobody else there, cartoons galore. A lot of time with my mom. There was one event I remember in particular, Andrew, that I think it was a Thanksgiving. My grandfather at one end of the table carving a turkey. I was at the other end of the table, was sort of the youngest there. And my grandfather said, "Johnny, my guess is you'd like a drumstick, right?" And I said innocently, "Sure, Grandpa," although I called him Papa. But I didn't have in mind what he then performed. There was a waiter standing there with a tray ready to take the drumstick. That wasn't the way he was going to deliver it. He took his arm back and threw the drumstick all the way across the table. I mean, the table must have been maybe 20 feet. And fortunately, his aim was terrific. I just lifted one of those heavy linen napkins up, and it hit right in the center. And everybody was, I guess, a combination of appalled and amused, grateful that his aim was as good as it was.
The dog was disappointed that his aim was so good.
Right.
What was her take on that moment?
I can't remember her a lot from those early years in the White House. She was traveling so much. I mean, she went, as you know, to the Pacific, Guadalcanal, all Pacific locations particularly where soldiers were hospitalized. So she was present on special occasions, and I remembered those occasions. But my grandfather was the person I was with. I mean, I was free to play on the floor in the Oval Office when it didn't have more important guests that he needed to see. He kept the Resolute desks, the same desk as is here now. He kept that desk with several sort of mechanical wind-up toys on it, and it was such a pleasure being with him. And I became fond of the self-service elevator, which at that age you can imagine it was just a wonderful plaything. And so I would push the buttons and it would go up and down. And I remember one occasion there was sort of felt like an insistent buzzing that I didn't perpetrate. And it clearly was somebody who wanted to use the elevator for the purpose it was designed. So I got onto the second floor, the living quarters of the White House, and there were Franklin Roosevelt and Winston Churchill relatively patiently waiting on the second floor for the elevator to come and take them downstairs. And my grandfather it's very, very characteristic of him, was not judgmental. He said, Johnny, you just have to remember that the elevator maybe has 2 or 3 designs, and one of them is carrying people up and down. And I said, yeah, Papa, I know. Apologies. I'm not sure I said apologies, but I meant it.
How do you follow that up? That's incredible. Winston. No,
Right.
So you just called him Pop. He was Pop, the leader of the free world, one of the most incredible, iconic people of history. He's fighting a war, unbelievable heavy things on his mind.
Yes.
And you and your mom, I mean, I imagine it was probably a balm to him to have you around.
I'd like to think so. And he gave me every reason that was true, that he was open-hearted. That's I think the phrase I would use. I was trying to think of other occasions in which, there's one in which I learned about but wasn't present for, fortunately, I guess, and that was that he and Churchill, maybe even on that visit, although there were several, were heavily engaged in a conversation that came to an end, and they both made for their bedrooms. But my grandfather stopped in the hallway outside his bedroom and said, there was something I really wanted to share with Winston. So he goes back, and he's so excited about what he wanted to say that he just opened Winston Churchill's bedroom door, only to discover Winston Churchill, pink, in the nude. And my grandfather apologizes. I'm so sorry, Winston. But he started to back out. And Winston Churchill said, don't back out. Come in. You are welcome. The Prime Minister of Great Britain has nothing to hide from the President of the United States. Oh.
Trust me, you do. Incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm.
I could have so many questions about FDR and about Eleanor, but I want to also talk to you a little bit about your father.
Yes.
Because his job was quite unique. And he was not a military man, right?
He was not a military man. In fact, my mother, in the years that around my birth in Seattle, he was the publisher of one of the 2 Seattle dailies, the Post-Intelligencer, and he trained himself as a reporter. He taught himself to write as a reporter. His early career was with the Chicago Tribune, which was not a Democratic newspaper, but he did a series of stories on a fellow reporter for the Tribune who was murdered in Chicago. And the then czar of the Chicago Tribune, a man named McCormick, said, John, that was such a successful collection of stories. I want to offer you any job you want as a reporter for the Tribune. And my father didn't even have to think about it. He said, I want to follow the campaign of the governor of New York State, Franklin Roosevelt. So that's how, on the campaign train in 1932, my mother and father met and fell in love.
A murder in Chicago is one of the reasons you exist.
That's right.
Talk about the butterfly effect. That just is an astounding fact.
Yeah. Oh.
Wow. Wow. And so they had a very romantic. I've read about their love.
Yeah.
But when the title of your book, A Love in Shadow,
Yes.
that you fall in love with a Roosevelt
Yes.
as just a regular guy. But your dad wasn't quite regular. He was very, clearly driven and very talented,
Yeah.
but racked with self-doubt that was
Yeah.
only exacerbated by the fact that he's
Yeah.
now, wedding the Roosevelts.
Yeah. Right.
Um,
Right.
I can't even imagine. I mean, you were so welcome and such a great part of your grandfather's life, but I imagine your father felt maybe not totally adequate.
I think that's right. That he, I think he, from early on, as I researched this book, that my father had a, a depressive side to his psyche, and and uh, I think that was one reason that my mother didn't want him to go to war, and I don't know how to put the rest of it except to say that he came home from the war um, damaged. I don't know that it was PTSD. My mother did offer the possibility of psychiatric treatment, which he refused. Um, at that point, there probably was no treatment for that war injury, what I've come to call moral injury, because the harm of doing battle, the 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 harm suffered by those who do battle and survive. That's moral injury, because that survival is compromised. There are more. I think it's true that there are more soldiers who who are assigned to battle stations overseas who die from suicide than they are soldiers who die from combat. So that to me is moral injury, and my father suffered it. They started a newspaper of their own, and of all places they could have picked, in Phoenix, Arizona. You know, it boggles the mind. I mean, Phoenix was then, as it is now, a sort of rock rib Republican town, and yet they successfully began. They bought a shopping news.
And
My
your
mom
dad,
and my dad.
which is a very bold thing to do, to go
Yeah.
into business with your partner,
Yeah.
with your
Yeah.
romantic partner.
Boy, that's true.
And for the belief that she had in him
Yeah.
as just a capable man
Yes.
was astounding.
Yeah.
And the things that she was willing to put on the line to make that happen, I was
Yes.
really impressed with. But one of the things that you talked about in the book that I found really interesting, your father was a decorated man. I mean, he went after his job not by asking FDR for a job, which would have been not out of the realm to ask your father-in-law for some help.
Yeah.
But he didn't want to. He wanted to contribute, but not with the total leg up. So he knew Eisenhower.
You're right. Yes.
Right? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, I don't know how he and Eisenhower became friends, but it was clearly before the majority of Eisenhower's time as a principal military leader in World War II. But he didn't, even with Eisenhower, he didn't seek any special treatment. I mean, he was made a captain. Maybe that's to some degree, special treatment. But he was older than draft age, and first assigned to North Africa. But the damage that was done, I think, to him was having been part of the first wave of American soldiers who went from North Africa, invaded Sicily, fought their way across Sicily into Italy, fought their way north through Italy into Germany, and it was still 1944. But he came home a little early, but for him, not early at all. He came home to find us in the White House, and we had about a year or so in the White House, living all together, which I was grateful for.
And your mom's job was no small job.
That's
I mean,
true.
some of the photos in your book, I mean, she's standing behind your father as he's shaking hands with Charles de Gaulle. I mean, she was there present. She went to the Tehran conferences. I mean, or was it
She
Tehran or
went to Yalta.
Yalta?
Yeah,
That's right.
right.
But your father went to Tehran
Yes.
for
Yes.
which is incredible.
Yeah.
It was your father and some of your uncles all went with him, right? Wasn't it?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyhow, your family, was very involved in the success of the Allied victory
Yeah.
in World War II, which has got to be. I mean, was that dinner conversation? Did you ever talk about that, like with your mom?
I think it was for me, it was too early. I mean, I was 6 when we left the White House and went west again. And my parents sought the Phoenix location. So
Well, before you went there, I want to talk to you about one more thing. Can you tell me about one of the things I found really striking about the book that you didn't make much of because you're just clearly a humble guy and you didn't really want to talk about yourself too much, but you were ill and everybody was very worried about little Johnny being ill at the same time that your grandfather passed.
Yeah.
You were in the hospital
Yeah.
when he suddenly.
Yeah, it was, I was in the hospital for, something we'd regard now as simple. It was a staph infection in my throat. But in those years, it was worrisome. And my grandfather left for Warm Springs, where he was shortly to die in 1945 on April 12th. And one of the last things he said before leaving for Warm Springs was, "Give my love to Johnny," that is still in the hospital. And I remember a nurse, I remember hearing on the radio of my hospital room that the president has died. And I couldn't make sense of it in my head. It didn't feel like Papa. And it wasn't until the next day when my mother came and confirmed that it was, and that we returned, only to clear out the toys in the White House and whatever belongings she had to make room for Harry Truman and his family.
You mentioned in the book, another writer called it the post-Roosevelt era.
Yeah.
That just, his passing from the world just was like, well, there was before this,
Yeah.
now there's everything else.
Right.
I can only imagine. So personally in your family, what was the post-Roosevelt era like for your family?
Well, it was in some ways less romantic, less full of the sort of unexpected pleasures that I've described about life in the White House. But I have, when they did start this daily liberal progressive daily newspaper in Phoenix, it caught hold, but at a lot of cost to the integrity of my family. We had a home that was sort of a semicircular phenomenon with outdoor passageways separating the components. In that sense, it reminded me, probably not back then, of a motel, of a sort of temporary, and I think my mind was preparing itself somehow for recognizing that this is the last home in which my parents' marriage and our family as I had known it would exist. And it became so. My mother took my older brother and sister and me to Los Angeles. My father was a sad time. I mean, he tried to find his own life, but really couldn't. And although he had several jobs, none of them really suited him. And ultimately, he committed suicide. And it was his, I remember writing, maybe even in 11 Shadow, that I'd spent in these years of my adulthood, I've spent so many years with sort of digesting and accommodating somehow his death that I didn't really understand his life. So his family, the Boettigers, I went in search of them. When I was writing this book, I thought to myself, not right away, but shortly after starting, there's a whole side of my family that I don't know, that I've got to find somehow, or else this book really doesn't get written because it's about my parents' marriage. And so I went in search of the Boettigers, and thankfully I found them. That they tended to move different pieces of the family, couples and families, moved together. They cared for each other, and they had moved most recently to San Diego. So I went to San Diego with my tape recorder and sort of sat at their feet and listened to the stories they told about their history. And that became a critical part of telling the story of my parents' marriage.
When you wrote the book, you were 35, 40 years old,
Yeah.
somewhere around there?
Yeah.
And what struck me about the book was, I mean, and you've told me this in person, that there was clearly quite a bit. Actually, when you and I first met, I didn't know your backstory.
Yeah.
I just know that you'd written a book.
Yeah.
I didn't know about what, and I didn't know about whom. And you were like very, humbly just said, yeah, my mother's side of the family, there's a lot written about, but my father's side, not so much. I was like, well, who's your mother's side? You told me who.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, I can imagine. Yeah, you went to the Library of Congress and the FDR library to go find resources, and you really did. I mean, there are letters that you've got cited in there, and like full quotations, full drafts of these letters that are beautifully written, so gorgeous.
Yeah.
But there was like hardly anything about your father. And I lost my father when I was in my 20s. You were 10, 7, 8, 9, 10 when your father?
Yeah, well, I was 11.
You were 11.
Right.
So, I mean, the amount of time that you had spent without your father by the time you decided to go write this book had been more than you'd ever gotten to spend with him.
Yeah.
And so to take that mind, that, 35, 40-year-old mind, and say, oh, I've got to find this man.
Yeah.
So I've got to find his family.
Yeah.
Tell me about that journey, that family legacy document that you made. Like, I know you said you went to their feet with the tape recorder. What was it like finding your father that way?
Oh, it was awkward in some ways, but it was revealing and I'd almost say exciting, but satisfying more. That I liked them. That I mean, this family, and they didn't. In some way, they didn't surprise me. Partly because I knew one person in the Boettiger family, my Uncle Bill, my father's brother, and he was still alive when I was writing the book, and he and his wife Grace I came to know because I was in a sort of early boarding school in Altadena, California, and so when I got to them, there was a lot that I suspected but didn't really yet understand, and I mean, I'd say they were a romantic family, that their care for each other was very real. Um, but but I came back with full of stories of them, and I began to feel sort of the healing of an imbalance in my attention. So I was able to, I mean, I remember sort of hearing from some voice in my head recently, I mean, literally in the past month or so, saying, "You're not done." I mean, I took it as the voice of this book that saying, "Yeah, it's good book, but you're not done." And I've, no, I haven't really responded to that by saying, "Oh, yeah, there's something in particular that I haven't attention to." I don't want to write an autobiography, um, but but uh, but I did decide that I'm going to write about mentors in my life, about people who have, at different stages of my life, my adult life especially, um, who 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 became close friends, who taught me things about their living that I accommodated, or as we became friends. And my grandmother was obviously the first of those. So the first chapter of this, what a series of essays about mentors, is about her, and that's probably the only one that's done, because the others are not as documented as I lived with her with my grandmother in Hyde Park, New York, and what we called the big house. And then at the home that my grandfather had designed for her in what he anticipated to be their retirement. Interestingly, he he designed two homes. So I'm not sure that I think in some ways he anticipated that they were not necessarily going to live in the same home after they retired, or after he retired. And because there was the top cottage, this is all in Hyde Park, New York. There was a top cottage, and there was Valkill, which Valkill is the stream that moved through the family's Hyde Park estate, and so he designed two homes for their retirement. But of course, it was a retirement that he never had. And my grandmother, on the other hand, well, I suppose you could say, except for the last months of her life, in 1962, before she died, that there was a slowing, a beginning kind of slowing, but not much, because I traveled with her a lot in Europe and in the States, and she was so full of beans. She was so full of energy and curiosity and a giving heart that I learned more from her. That's why she is mentor number one.
Can you give me an example? Something that I know it's tough to put you right on the spot here, but
Oh,
anything in particular?
let me think for a second. Um,
And I've poured you some tea if you'd like some tea.
oh,
Help yourself.
thank you. I'll have
It's
some
probably gotten going. No,
water.
take your time.
Um,
Take your time and think. I'd love to hear
yeah,
anything that comes up.
I think the time that I think of, I was an undergraduate at Amherst College, and she had come up to Amherst College to speak to the community, and later, but let's see, sometime in the course of those years, I graduated in 1960, and sometime in the course of those years, I was the president somehow of what was called the Collegiate Council for the United Nations. She was on the board of its adult counterpart, the American Association for the United Nations. And so we both had the interesting positions of being on the same board at the same time. And like I could tell when she was taking one of her power naps, but I don't think that her other colleagues realized that. And 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 one time for my sort of UN work, I went to a conference in Berlin, and I got a phone call from my grandmother saying, "Johnny, I'm in Brussels. I want you to come for lunch tomorrow." And I said, "Grand-mère," that was my name for her, and all my other cousins' name for her. I, I'm in Berlin. I have no idea how. I mean, it's hard enough to get to Berlin, but I have no idea how to get for lunch tomorrow and to you in Brussels. Well, she would not take no for an answer. She said, "Well, I have a guest, a special guest, whom I would like you to meet." And I said, "Well, I'll try." And so I got to the airport in Berlin, which was in the eastern, sort of Russian-dominated part of the city at that time, and found a Polish Airlines flight. The Polish Airlines had commandeered a relic of World War II, and it was a DC-3 that they decked out with tassels, looking like a Victorian idea. And the one thing they had neglected was that if they were to encounter turbulence or distress in flight, a pilot at that time had to speak either French or English. And the Polish pilot spoke neither one. So when I didn't know that, but the plane would descend, and then suddenly I'd look out the window and see telephone poles flashing by, and so we'd make this really powerful ascent, and we kept doing that because it was the only way he had of sort of knowing something about where he was. Well, fortunately, we made it. We got to the airport in Brussels. I got to the lunch. My grandmother was pleased. I was pleased. And the guest that she wanted me to meet was Harry Belafonte. She just thought that she loved his work, his singing, and she wanted me to meet him. And I love that about her.
Is that what got you involved in civil rights, knowing Harry Belafonte?
No, I think I think it was later that my devotion to civil rights emerged really at the end of my student years. I'd become devoted to going to Selma, Alabama, the Edmund Pettus Bridge. You know, that was the time of the emergence through Martin Luther King of the civil rights movement. So I left my teaching job at Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts, and spent months going south. Yeah.
I definitely want to cover that because it's an enormously important part of your life. Just to sort of close the loop on the this book, the whole Roosevelt era. I mean, the way that you and your mother described the place. That Hyde Park, their beloved animals buried there. Is your Is FDR buried
Yeah,
there?
yes.
At Hyde Park? He's also
In
buried there as well.
the sort of the rose garden of at 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 the principal house in Hyde Park, all of which is a National Historic Site now. Um, my grandparents are both buried, and there's a small set of graves that are not marked as prominently. One for Fala, my grandpa's dog, and one for Prince, my mother's dog. Um, I guess that's it. But
Chief.
Chief
Chief.
was my mother's dog.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I love that your family has such a value in dog. I think you and my dog actually really likes you. He can be sort of ambivalent.
Well, I like
but
your dog.
yeah, but he really likes you. So that may be a direct lineage to some sort of like he can understand that you've come from dog people.
Right.
But I mean, so I just, your take and the things that you've seen in that office, the White House, is some of the most troubled times, deeply, deeply troubled times. The World War II was nothing to sniff at. Very troubled. But the dignity of that office, like your grandfather, he'd been this big strapping man, and to be kind of taken down by polio, but still able to project a dignity and a competency and a sort of, I don't know, carrying himself with no ego that was wildly apparent to the modern, the sensibility. It just seemed to have like okay, here's the job. I'm here. I'm a servant. Obviously they came from pretty, to be a Roosevelt is a lofty thing. Like he came from a president, and now he's president. He'd been a governor, done a lot of great things. Didn't he run the Navy for a while as well?
He was Assistant Secretary of the Navy.
That's the guy who does a lot of hard work for the Navy.
Yeah.
But so, he had come from a lot of very, prominent positions, but carried it and did it without a sense of entitlement. And this just...
I think that's really true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
very much so.
What I want to get is your take on having seen the office run by some of the most dignified but understated people, that were there to do good.
Yeah.
I mean, that both your mother and your father just wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah.
To the fact where your father flew over to Italy and saw just horror and helped people rebuild, to now. We're in a very different world now.
Yeah.
I want to get your take on how you feel about modernity. What's happening this moment? It's right now. It's end of April, 2026. Many decades since your grandfather passed.
Yeah, it's distressing, Andrew. I mean, it's the only word that comes easily to mind. That the presidency. I mean, there were early and failures of earlier presidents, but none as clearly moving toward an authoritarian character as is the presidency of Trump. But it's hard to cope with that presence, especially when I've known it's virtually opposite in my own life. It's a very difficult time, and it's full of just an omnipresent, almost continuing source of sort of mini tragedies, that dog the presidency, office writ large. So I sometimes can't pay attention to it. I'm as much a news follower as anybody, but it's hard for me to remember that we have, almost 3 more years of that presidency to experience. And it's not as if, say, somebody like whoever the guy was who shot up the correspondence dinner, um, it's it, it's not as if any of our true goals can be served by assassination. I mean, one doesn't wish that on anybody. I think those who would succeed him in this 3-year period, just as distressing as he. So I'm kind of glad that I'm retired. I'm glad that also that there were 2 people of my generation in the Roosevelt family that people thought, as I was in college and even beginning graduate school, that people thought, well, if there are 2 natural politicians in the family, it's going to be you, John, and your cousin Frank, who, although he is FDR the third, always says Frank. And it turned out to be neither one of us, that we were going to take our own paths in the world. And both of us academic. I mean, he taught for years, very satisfyingly. He taught sort of politics and economics at Sarah Lawrence College, and I became a psychologist, and which I suppose bespeaks an interest in family and human development. So I think both Frank and I are following our own paths, and that nobody's disappointed in us.
I can't imagine anyone being disappointed in the life's work that you've done. And you were I think I mentioned in the beginning, so perfectly suited to write the book that you did. Because it's like you have in your home, you were showing me these beautiful insos, which the inso, for anybody who doesn't know, it's, when someone takes in one breath and one movement makes a circle with some sort of mark.
Yes.
It's a Zen Buddhist idea.
Yes.
But your arc as someone who had such a unique family dynamic and then learned how to interpret family dynamics and then write about it is a beautiful inso in itself.
Yeah.
That I found just in reading your book and getting to know you really compelling, and it's sweet, but it's so perfectly timed that you had these experiences, you went and learned how to interpret them, and then came back and shared them to contextualize your own life, your father's life, your siblings, everyone's lives, and to honor. I mean, your mother had just only passed a few years before you wrote this book.
Yeah.
And it's a moving tribute to all involved, including your father, your mother, your grandparents. And I just, when I think about someone like yourself who has, you resisted the urge to become a politician, chose happiness, I would imagine, instead.
Yeah.
And found a way to still be, as your grandmother and your mom, useful. And you've been very, very useful. And I wanted to ask you one more thing before we sign off about being useful. We see some of the largest protests we've ever seen.
Yes.
In recent times. I mean, absolutely massive.
Yeah.
Millions of people all around the world very upset, and the needle has not moved one iota.
Yeah.
It seems, cynically.
I think so.
If it has moved, it's moved in the opposite. Things have gotten worse. And you have been a part of some very effective protest movements.
Well, I think I haven't been a leader so much as a participant in them, and like the recent No Kings protests that really, I think, if you just think of the numerical number, the sense of nationwide experiences, they were powerful. I mean, I think we have in my community have a an organization called Mill Valley Seniors for Peace, you know about,
Lovely.
and so we gather on the corner uh, and demonstrate, and that particular day, uh, we we were we knew that there were others demonstrating all over the country,
All over the world.
all over the world. So No Kings began something that I trust will continue, and I have a lot of faith in our surviving the Trump years, whatever they'll bring.
We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe.
What gives you that hope?
You know, I don't know what I think I had that hope in experiencing a lot of earlier losses, including my father's. I think my experience of losing my mother, somehow there's a kind of reservoir of anticipating and working for um, the 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 kind of world we wish for, that and work for. Yeah, and that's just somehow baked into me, and it's not that I created it. I think it was a part of having grown up in the circumstances that we've just been describing. Yeah.
What a gift. Of all the gifts to have been given, a sense of optimism or hope or whatever,
Yeah.
however you want to put it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So before we sign off, if there were any one thing that you would want people to know, like future generations, your great-grandchildren, if there's anything that, from your many years of experience, the things you've seen, the travel, the teaching, all these things, the loss, is there anything that you would want them to remember and know?
It's hard to say. I think it's what you're asking about is my embodied legacy. My looking to not only to the adulthood, which I already know of my children, but to the adulthood of my grandchildren, and now even 3 great-grandchildren. It's a wish to be remembered, however I'm remembered, as someone devoted to their well-being. That just that. It's not complicated, but it's 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 the love I experienced in as we walked out of Grace Cathedral that day, and I mentioned to 2 of my boys, your development really is yours to choose, and um, I I'd like to be remembered simply for that spirit.
I've lied to you. I want to ask you one more question. I want to ask you so many more questions. And I know Mike is going to have some things that he might have on his mind. I don't know. But
Yeah.
is there anything that your grandmother or grandfather said to you that you want to make sure that your great-grandkids knew about?
My time with my grandmother when we were actually living together in Hyde Park and in New York City was full of uh, of caretaking on both of our parts. I mean, we'd sit in her living room and we'd watch Adlai Stevenson on the television set, trying his best to embody the spirit of the United Nations, of which he was our ambassador at the time. My grandmother was devoted to Adlai Stevenson. Let me actually answer your question by not recalling something particularly said by one of them to me, but recalling what Adlai Stevenson said about my grandmother, that when she died in 1962, he said, among other things, in the memorial service at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City, she would rather light a candle than curse the darkness. That's the full phrase. Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Oh,
I appreciate you taking the time on a Sunday to come over here and hang out and tell me your story. I'm looking forward to many more years of us hanging out
Wonderful.
and learning from you.
Yes.
And I want to come join you at the Seniors for Peace
Lovely.
some Friday.
Oh,
is it every
yes.
Friday?
It's every Friday. I don't make it every Friday, but
Okay.
but it is every Friday. Yes.
All right. There's still reason for hope.
Yes.
Okay.
There is.
Thank you so much, John. I'm going to have you sign my book before we
Okay.
leave.
I enjoy that.
Thank you.